The weekends used to be my sanctuary, a time to relax and recharge after a demanding week of work. But ever since David and I moved into our dream home, they had transformed into a dreaded routine. David's parents, Harold and Evelyn, would barge in without warning, disrupting the peace I craved. One Saturday morning, I was sipping my coffee in the cozy kitchen when the sound of the doorbell shattered the calm. I opened the door, plastering a forced smile on my face. "Good morning, Julia. How have you been?" Evelyn chirped, oblivious to the annoyance that welled up inside me. "Morning, Mom. I'm fine, just trying to enjoy my weekend," I replied, hoping my tone conveyed a subtle hint. Harold, always a man of few words, grunted a greeting, making himself comfortable on the couch without waiting for an invitation. As I tried to retreat to the kitchen, Evelyn intercepted me. "Oh, Julia, before you go, could you make us some tea? It's been a long drive and we're parched." I bit my tongue, suppressing the frustration bubbling within me. "Sure, just give me a moment," I managed to say with a tight smile. The kitchen, once my haven, now felt like a battleground. David entered, sensing the tension in the air. "Hey, Mom, Dad, you guys didn't call ahead." Evelyn waved off his concern. "Oh, we wanted it to be a surprise. Plus, we knew you'd be happy to see us." I shot David a pleading look, silently begging him to address the intrusion. Instead, he chuckled nervously, leaving me to cater to his parents' unexpected arrival. Throughout the day, their demands mounted. David seemed oblivious or, worse, indifferent to my discomfort. As I cleaned up after their impromptu lunch, I caught a snippet of their conversation. "David, don't you think this room could use some redecorating?" Evelyn suggested, eyeing our living room with a critical gaze. David, ever eager to please his parents, nodded. "Yeah, Mom, maybe Julia and I should consider a makeover." I clenched my fists, the frustration now simmering beneath the surface. This was my home too, damn it. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a relentless invasion that would push me to the brink. The following weekend rolled around, and I braced myself for another unexpected visit from David's parents. Little did I know that their intrusion would extend beyond just unplanned visits, venturing into the realm of unwanted interference in our home search plans. As we sat in the living room, casually flipping through potential house listings, Evelyn suddenly pulled out a glossy brochure. "Look at this one, David. It's near the subway station, and there's enough space for a duplex house. Wouldn't that be perfect?" My eyes darted between the brochure and David's unsuspecting expression. "A duplex, huh?" I mumbled, unable to hide the skepticism in my voice. Harold grunted in agreement, adding, "Duplexes are great. You can have your own space, and we can have ours. Perfect for family, don't you think?" I exchanged a glance with David, silently urging him to address his parents' blatant intrusion into our property search. But he remained silent, either oblivious to or unwilling to acknowledge the uncomfortable situation. Trying to maintain composure, I finally spoke up. "Well, we were thinking of exploring different options before making a decision. It's essential to find a place that suits both of us." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by my resistance. "Oh, we just thought it would be easier if we all lived close by. Family support and all that." David, caught in the middle, stammered, "Yeah, Mom, but Julia and I were planning to discuss our preferences and then decide." Evelyn's gaze lingered on me, and I felt the weight of her unspoken expectations. "Of course, dear, take your time, but do consider what's best for the family. We're just here to help." As the weekend progressed, I realized that their interest in our property search wasn't about offering helpful suggestions. It was an attempt to subtly impose their preferences on us. The idea of them living nearby, entangled in our daily lives, began to feel suffocating. Little did I know, this unwanted interference would escalate, pushing me to confront David about the boundaries we desperately needed to establish. The tension in our home had reached an all-time high. The unwanted suggestions about our property search lingered, and I could no longer ignore the fact that David's parents were more involved in our lives than I had signed up for. One evening, as we sat in the living room, I gathered the courage to bring up the subject that had been gnawing at me. "David, we need to talk about your parents. They're getting too involved in our decisions, especially about our future home." David looked up from his phone, seemingly surprised by my directness. "What do you mean, Julia?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "They've been pushing for us to live near them, even suggesting specific properties. It's starting to feel like they want to dictate our choices." His brow furrowed, and he sighed. "Come on, Julia. They're just excited about us finding a new place. They mean well." I shook my head, frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's more than that, David. They're not just excited. They're pushing their preferences onto us. And I can't help but feel like they're expecting us to live in proximity for reasons beyond just family support." He looked conflicted, torn between loyalty to his parents and the realization that their involvement might be crossing a line. "Look, Julia, they're just trying to help. Let's not overthink it. We'll talk to them, set some boundaries. I'm sure they'll understand." I studied his face, searching for sincerity. "David, it's not just about talking to them. It's about us, about our decisions as a couple. I need to know that we're on the same page." He hesitated before responding. "Of course, Julia. We're a team. I'll talk to them, make it clear that we need to make decisions as a couple." I nodded, hoping that my concerns had registered with him. Little did I know that David's assurance would prove to be a mere band-aid on a much deeper issue. The unilateral decisions made by his parents were not to be easily thwarted, setting the stage for a more significant clash of wills in the chapters that followed. The days that followed our candid conversation were tense, with an air of anticipation hanging between us. I could sense David's internal struggle, torn between his loyalty to his parents and his commitment to our relationship. As the weekend approached, I wondered if our talk would yield any change. Saturday arrived, and with it, the inevitable knock on the door. David answered, and I couldn't help but notice the hesitation in his greeting. "Hey, Mom, Dad, come on in." As they settled in the living room, I braced myself for another round of unsolicited suggestions or, hopefully, a breakthrough in setting boundaries. David caught my eye, silently signaling that he intended to address the issue. Over dinner, as the conversation meandered through safe topics, David finally steered it toward the elephant in the room. "Mom, Dad, there's something we need to talk about. Julia and I appreciate your enthusiasm about our new home, but we need to make our decisions as a couple." Harold and Evelyn exchanged glances, seemingly caught off guard by the serious turn of the conversation. Evelyn spoke first, her voice filled with a mix of surprise and defensiveness. "We just want what's best for you two. Is it so wrong to offer some advice?" David sighed, choosing his words carefully. "It's not about the advice, Mom. It's about respecting our decisions. We're grateful for your support, but we need space to make choices that reflect our preferences and priorities." I held my breath, waiting for their reaction. To my surprise, Harold nodded in understanding. "I get it. We'll give you both the space you need." Evelyn, however, seemed less willing to let go of her influence. "But David, we're just trying to help. We've been through this before, and we know what works best for a family." David shot me an apologetic glance before responding. "I appreciate that, Mom, but we're building our own family now. Julia and I need the freedom to explore what works best for us." As the evening wore on, it became clear that David's words had made an impact, though reluctantly so. The atmosphere shifted from one of resistance to a tentative understanding. I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope that perhaps our relationship would weather this storm. Little did I know that this compromise was merely the calm before a more significant, tumultuous clash between familial expectations and our quest for independence. The tentative peace that followed our reluctant compromise was short-lived. David's parents, though seemingly understanding of our need for space, persisted in their relentless visits, each weekend bringing a new wave of demands and intrusions. One Saturday morning, as I was trying to enjoy a rare moment of solitude, the doorbell rang. I opened it, half expecting an unexpected package, only to find Harold and Evelyn standing on the doorstep with overstuffed overnight bags. "Surprise! We thought we'd spend the weekend with you," Evelyn exclaimed, her enthusiasm masking any consideration for our plans or personal space. I forced a smile, trying to suppress the growing frustration. Sure, come on in." As the day unfolded, so did their demands. From suggesting changes to our furniture arrangement to dictating the menu for meals, they made it clear that our home was not just ours, but an extension of their domain. During dinner, David attempted to steer the conversation toward more neutral topics, hoping to avoid confrontation. "So, Mom, Dad, anything exciting happening in your lives lately?" Harold grunted noncommittally, but Evelyn seized the opportunity to express her expectations. "Actually, we were thinking it would be nice to have a family gathering here next weekend. Invite some relatives over." I exchanged a glance with David, silently pleading for him to intervene. "Mom, maybe we should talk about this. We have plans, and it's essential to give Julia and me some notice." Evelyn dismissed his concerns with a wave of her hand. "Oh, we're sure you can manage. We'll invite everyone, and it'll be a great family get-together." As the weekend unfolded, their demands escalated. From early morning wake-up calls to requests for elaborate meals, I felt like a guest in my own home, catering to their every whim. The breaking point came when Evelyn casually mentioned, "David, we've been thinking of redecorating the guest room. It needs a fresh look, don't you think?" I shot David a pointed look, frustration etched across my face. "David, we need to talk. This can't continue. We agreed on boundaries, and your parents are crossing them." David sighed, caught between the expectations of his parents and the reality of our strained relationship. "Mom, Dad, Julia's right. We need to revisit our agreement. This constant intrusion is affecting our relationship." Evelyn's face tightened, revealing her displeasure. "Well, we're just trying to be a part of your lives. Is that too much to ask?" Harold, usually silent, spoke up. "Maybe we should give them some space. We'll head home early this weekend." David, torn between his loyalty to his parents and the strain in our relationship, nodded reluctantly. As they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that this battle over boundaries was far from over. The persistent visitors had left their mark, and our home had become a battleground where compromise seemed increasingly elusive. The aftermath of the persistent visitors left an uneasy tension lingering in our home. David had promised to revisit the boundaries, but it seemed like his parents' expectations were more deeply ingrained than either of us anticipated. The weekends became a testing ground for the fragility of our agreement. One Saturday morning, as I attempted to enjoy a peaceful breakfast, the doorbell rang. An instinctive dread settled in my stomach. David opened the door, revealing his parents once again. "Surprise, surprise, we thought we'd spend the day with you," Evelyn exclaimed, her cheerfulness belying the disappointment I felt. David shot me an apologetic glance, clearly caught off guard. Sure, come on in." As the day progressed, it became evident that our agreement had been tossed aside like yesterday's news. David's parents resumed their demanding routine, from suggesting improvements to our garden to dictating what should be on the grocery list for the week. Attempting to salvage the situation, David approached me in the kitchen. "Julia, I didn't expect them to come again so soon. I thought we had an understanding." I sighed, frustration bubbling to the surface. "David, this is exactly what I was afraid of. They're disregarding our agreement, and it feels like you're not doing enough to enforce it." He looked conflicted, torn between his loyalty to his parents and the deteriorating state of our relationship. "I'll talk to them, Julia, I promise." However, when he confronted his parents, their reaction was far from understanding. Evelyn retorted, David, we're just trying to be a part of your lives. If you can't appreciate that, maybe we shouldn't visit at all." I overheard their conversation, my heart sinking at the lack of resolution. David, caught in the middle, seemed helpless. "Mom, Dad, it's not about pushing you away. Julia and I need space to build our life together. Can't you respect that?" Harold grunted, seemingly unmoved. "We just want what's best for you two." As they left, the promise of resolution seemed more distant than ever. The broken promises hung in the air, and the realization hit me that our relationship was at a crossroads. I couldn't help but wonder if the strain caused by his parents' constant intrusion would push us to a breaking point that neither of us could come back from. The breaking point was inevitable, a culmination of broken promises and mounting frustrations. The strain in our relationship reached a boiling point, and I could no longer endure the constant intrusion into our lives. One weekend, as David's parents once again descended upon our home, I felt a surge of frustration and helplessness. The air was thick with tension, and I knew that something had to give. During a tense dinner, I mustered the courage to confront the issue head-on. "David, we need to talk. This can't go on. Your parents are crossing boundaries, and I can't keep pretending everything is okay." David looked torn, caught between the woman he married and the parents he was desperately trying to please. "Julia, we've talked about this. I'll talk to them again, I promise." But I had reached my limit. "Talking isn't enough, David. We need action. I can't live like this, feeling like a stranger in my own home." His mother interjected, "Julia, dear, we're just trying to be a part of your life." "What's wrong with that?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "Evelyn, I appreciate your intentions, but there's a difference between being a part of our lives and taking over. I need my space, our space." David's father, usually a man of few words, added, "Maybe we should give them some time alone. We'll leave early this weekend." But David's response was not what I expected. "No, Dad, that's not necessary." "Julia, can't you see they're just trying to help? Why are you making this so difficult?" I felt the weight of his words, a stark realization that perhaps our values and priorities were more misaligned than I had acknowledged. "David, if you can't see how this is affecting us, then maybe we need to reassess our priorities." Silence hung in the room, a palpable tension that underscored the gravity of the situation. I continued, "I've been patient, David, but I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for the sake of your parents. If you can't understand that, maybe we're not on the same page anymore." As the words hung in the air, I knew that the breaking point had arrived. I had to make a decision, one that would change the course of our relationship forever. Little did I know that the repercussions of this pivotal moment would reverberate far beyond our home and into the very fabric of our lives. The breaking point had come, and the decision weighed heavily on my heart. As David's parents continued their intrusion, I realized that staying in this relationship meant sacrificing my own well-being. It was time to make a painful choice. One evening, after another tense encounter with his parents, I sat David down for a conversation that would change everything. "David, I can't keep living like this. Our home has become a battleground, and I need to prioritize my happiness." He looked at me, a mix of confusion and disbelief in his eyes. "Julia, what are you saying? We can work through this. I'll talk to them again, I promise." I shook my head, the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. "David, it's not just about talking. Our priorities are different, and I can't keep pretending that everything will magically improve. I need to leave." His face contorted in a mix of shock and denial. "Leave? Julia, you can't be serious. We're married. We can find a way to make it work." Tears welled up in my eyes as I spoke words I never thought I would utter. "David, I've tried to make it work, but I can't ignore the toll this is taking on me. I need to prioritize my own well-being." His desperation turned to anger. "So you're just going to give up on us? On our marriage?" I held back my tears, steeling myself for the inevitable pain. David, I'm not giving up. I'm choosing myself. I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for a relationship that's suffocating me. The room fell silent, the weight of our unspoken truths hanging in the air. David, unable to find words, watched as I packed a bag with the essentials. As I walked toward the door, he finally spoke, his voice filled with a mix of sadness and frustration. Julia, please don't do this. We can find a way to make it work. Just give it time. But I couldn't turn back. David, I've given it time. I've given everything I can. This is what I need to do. As the door closed behind me, I felt a mixture of relief and heartache. The departure was a painful necessity, a step toward reclaiming my life and finding a sense of peace that had eluded me for too long. Little did I know that the consequences of this departure would extend far beyond our home, shaping the trajectories of our lives in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Leaving David was a painful decision, but it was a step toward reclaiming my sanity. As the days passed, the consequences of my departure began to unfold, casting shadows on both our lives. A few months later, I received an unexpected call from David. His voice carried an air of urgency and uncertainty. Julia, how much longer do you plan not to return? Have you forgotten what day it is? This Saturday, we were supposed to invite your coworkers over to our new house. The irony wasn't lost on me. My decision to leave had consequences that extended beyond our fractured marriage. David, I left because I couldn't continue living the way we were. I can't come back just for a social gathering. His panic was palpable. But Julia, it's important. I've invited my new boss, and if I cancel now, it could affect my future at work. You don't want that, do you? A bitter laugh escaped me. David, my departure had consequences. Yours should too. You chose to prioritize your parents over our relationship. Now you have to deal with the fallout. He pleaded with me, desperation evident in his tone. Please, Julia, don't let my career suffer because of this. Can't you come back, just for this event? I stood firm, unwilling to bend to the pressure. David, this is a consequence of the choices we've made. I can't undo what's been done. As I hung up, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, empathy for the consequences he faced, but also a sense of vindication for standing up for my own happiness. The next day, a call from my mother brought an unexpected revelation. Oh, Emma, are you doing well? Sorry, I haven't been calling you. I've refrained because your in-laws visit every weekend. My heart sank, realizing that the pattern continued even after my departure. I shared my struggles, and my mother's concern was evident. Emma, that sounds tough. I imagine you'd be busy settling in after moving. Why don't you invite your parents over this weekend? Maybe your in-laws would refrain from coming. It was a simple yet profound suggestion. That evening, I proposed the idea to David when he called. Hey, Michael, I want to invite my parents over this weekend. Is that okay? His response caught me off guard. No way. My parents already planned to come over this weekend. Your parents haven't been over even once. I couldn't fathom his logic. David, your parents have been visiting every weekend. I haven't invited my own parents to our new house. Can't we find a compromise? But his refusal was resolute. No compromise. If you can't call off your parents, then mine don't have to come to your house anymore. If you don't like it, you can leave. The irony struck me. The one who had left was now being blamed for the consequences of the choices David had made. The consequences of our actions were unveiled, exposing the fault lines in our relationship that had been building for far too long. As I hung up the phone, a sense of finality settled in. The consequences of our choices had come full circle, and the paths we had chosen were irreversibly diverging. Little did I know that the ripples of these consequences would continue to shape our lives in unexpected ways.